And he's going to be joined by Piers at some point. And hand over to you, Phil. Look forward to it.
Thank you, here I am once again. Long time no see. This is the second part of my talk which I gave last year, and it goes off on a bit of a one. I'll briefly go over what I've done before with the weather, basic circuitry, and then I'm going to take it to somewhere else. So let's get on with it. Sorry, I'm going to be reading this from the script, so it's going to be quite straight. Anyway. Mother Nature doesn't take the hard road, and like the electricity that powers her and indeed us, she always takes the path of least resistance. And I keep with this very much in mind when looking for an explanation how reality functions as a whole. By studying more lately the Sapphire Project, our little electric sun on Earth, in combination with the years of looking at our weather, both as a young Brit growing up in London, but also spending a lot of time in rural Essex with relatives as a kid, and then later on in more depth as a horticulturalist gardener, I have come to the understanding of the fractal nature of an energy input into a nucleus and the atmospheric layering it produces, but also with that happening across many scales of magnitude from the atom up. So yes, we are talking about a different structure of the atom. So in the end, it's led me to try to pin down the weather mechanics from an electrical perspective, but also the workings of the power input into the nucleus and the responses to that. What we observed with Sapphire is that an energy input into the anode nucleus, and when the right amount of power input is delivered, will create stable double layers. A distinct layering of its atmosphere which steps up and down the voltage gradient within the plasma discharge. What we also saw with Sapphire was that when a tungsten tip Langmuir probe was used to take data from the discharge, and when it was inserted into the plasma anode atmospheric contact layer from the outside, which is the closest layer, it vaporized. The tungsten simply vaporized. The interesting thing to note was that there wasn't enough temperature in the Sapphire chamber to even melt the probe, let alone vaporize it. So the team got NASA to check the computational maths, and they said that they were good. They agreed that the maths said that the input voltage shouldn't make the tungsten simply disappear in an instant, let alone turn it to liquid. Plasma makes up at least 99.99% of the universe, or the known universe, and we are now making massive inroads into understanding it and its electrical nature within our community. Since being designed from the floor up and then constructed a few years ago, the Sapphire Project is continually showing us stuff we have never seen before. So this and the electric universe in general is not just at, but is the cutting edge of modern day science. This is vividly shown with Sapphire, already giving us the same energy densities as our big sun, as well as nuclear explosions. It transmutes elements and even slows certain frequencies of light. And so, although not directly openly said, is giving us all the things we would expect to see if we saw fusion in a plasma. So what was happening with Sapphire and the probe? Well, it seemed to act like a Birkeland current, but due to the gauge, the thickness of the probe, couldn't take the amount of accelerated charge flowing backwards and forwards through it as it tried to balance the charge between the two poles of the anode and the outer atmospheric layer. The probe had short-circuited the voltage differential across the step double layers and vaporized. Even though the external heat was within the parameters expected, once the measuring device was inserted, it automatically altered the parameters and became very, very hot down the length of the probe as the charge accelerated backwards and forwards through it. At this scale of our planet, shorting across the top and the bottom of the voltage-laden atmosphere would enable all the power in the ionosphere to discharge through a single point. So, as well as previously pointed out, exactly the same thing would happen if a space elevator was ever tried to be constructed, creating an absolutely massive short circuit between the ionosphere and the ground. even if they didn't touch the ground and was designed to hang from space, like it has been suggested, that type of design would just create a massive spark gap, as it would still need to discharge the power of the whole ionosphere to the Earth. So it's just an impossibility. The atmospheric layering with sapphire was not a disk of plasma, but instead complete spheres around a central anode. But due to the nature of the plasma discharge, it can be seen as being lighter at the edges of each layer. This is because we are looking through the edge of the plasma sphere, and so a thicker amount of bright discharge can be seen at the edges. As a child, I wondered, among other things, why clouds flatten out at certain points through the atmosphere. And so when first seeing sapphire's atmospheric layers and looking into the ideas that made up the electric universe in general, and then adding to what I already knew about meteorology, it came together and started to make a sense, well, in my head. There are other people also working on describing electrical weather model, and we'll see how accurate each of these interpretations turns out to be in the future. A big difference between this model and another, not Antis, which is the way the circuitry between the ionosphere and the ground runs. So are the atmospheric lows the down currents with the highs being returning current, or is it the other way round as the other person says? It is quite universally taught that the position goes to the negative, it is quite universally taught that the positive goes to the negative in a circuit, battery, etc. But this is wrong, and is sadly typical of the education in sciences as a whole during the 20th century, as when new discoveries are made to show that the previous assumptions are wrong, the original thinking is still held on with much vigour by those who were taught it, teach it, and indeed experiment with it. Later, and after describing that positive goes to negative, we came to the conclusion that it was the electrons that were moving, and so it's closer to say, as a model, that the negative is actually going to the positive. But once again, once the ether and physical experimentation are taken into consideration, then even this is questionable. There is much we don't know about electricity, but are continually finding out about in the 21st century. Or should that be finding out about it again after being led astray during the 20th century? Due to the convenience of the old model, though, many still go with the original narrative of positive to negative, as on the surface it does seem to explain a lot of observations. So does our big sun give out CMEs and solar winds? Well, no, as Sapphire has shown, by changing the cathode plates, and so instead it is the planets drawing charge from the sun. So it seems very much that the charge differential between each is making each reach towards each other, at least to some degree. Even with a negative pole of a DC circuit, can see what are called negative leaders. With AC it is much more obvious that both poles are trying to make the circuit and balance the system as a whole. So we can clear. This is probably an AC power supply, so they wouldn't actually going backwards and forwards. But it does show that they are literally reaching for each other. So in the end, and although we do not identify directions correctly in the circuits, with my reasoning of the electron being an energy response into a nucleus, it is my estimation that the cause of an electrical flow is actually something else other than normal matter and charge on it. It is the interaction of a neutral matter with a neutrino substrate. So it's the ether that is moving from one atom to the next and energising each atom in turn, and so giving just the impression that it is what we call the electron that is moving. but for convenience sake though, I will carry on saying moving charge, electrons as well as the ether. So with this type of thinking based on the actual observations first, I, like the rest in our community, I'll be turning to the days of Michael Faraday and the like, where an ether was known to exist in their minds and where experimental and empirical science ruled the day. And I think now in this modern day we will prove its existence one way or another and how it actually affects matter, even though traditionally it's supposed to not have too much of an effect at all. This was a time before guesswork took hold of scientific thinking during the 20th century and simply dismissed electricity as having any importance as to how the universe functions, and for what was just political and economic reasons at the time, but which has sadly carried on till this day. So like so much in mainstream science these days, it is not actual empirical science, but instead just a show of hands to decide what is correct by the interested parties involved, who can then justify the many, many, many billions already spent, but also continue to be spent on places like CERN and LIGO. At this point it is a good time to realise the difference in scale between a million and a billion, because they're words that get bandied about, but people don't actually realise the difference. Scientific endeavour like Sapphire cost in relation to mainstream science 1 million seconds, and 1 million seconds is just over 11 days, whereas 1 billion seconds is over 33 years. There's a massive difference. By using observations and the real experimental plasma experimentation of the recent past meant that Sapphire was designed, built and instantly gave us the data we expected, and of course a whole lot more, with this being achieved in less than 3 months worth of seconds, whereas CERN up to 2012 cost 444 years worth of seconds, and of course carries on to be expensive to this day. This is a very telling little graphic from CERN. That blip is what cost the many, many, many billions of pounds. There's blips all over that line, but that particular one is said to prove the existence of the Higgs boson. So in the end, and although we need to identify... oh, I've done that bit, sorry, wrong page. Need to turn over.
There are some other blips in that one.
Yeah, exactly.
But that is probably the biggest one.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But we can talk about that later. But what they have ignored is some white words from Richard Feynman. This is 1963.
How we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare those computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience. Compare it directly with observations to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is, it doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess, or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it.
This is obviously very different to what we've experienced in the 20th century. When it proves to be wrong, you alter
the facts.
Correct. Thank you, Piers. Atmospheric pressure, air pressure by heat is thought to traditionally drive our weather, but they are only the result of moving charge through the atmosphere, and so do not make the weather, as they are just byproducts of the processes going on. An electric vacuum cleaner spins by way of the electric motor, and it is high spin rate that creates low air pressure, and so making the cleaner suck. And likewise, it is not air pressure creating movement through the atmosphere, but instead it is a spinning charge through the atmosphere that is creating the low pressure. After learning the fractal nature of moving charge through our reality from an overall electric universe perspective, and which naturally included the Earth's weather, all roads pinched together to an inclusive understanding in one mind, with that being that a power input into the nucleus will produce charged shells around the nucleus as a response. With this being just like the visual double layers in sapphire, or indeed with them being shown with us of the flattening out of clouds in our own Earth's atmosphere. It shows distinct layers. With this model, as with the others, we have electrical charged particles connecting the Earth to the Sun via CMEs and coronal mass streams, where the junction points gets channeled to our magnetosphere towards the poles, and where we see an interaction with it, with our atmosphere. We are always told that magnetism has lines of force, but once again this is not true, and the lines are only there as a way of describing what is happening within the field. So they are not just isobars, so they're just like isobar lines on a weather map, which only gives an indication of changing air pressure within the atmosphere, but are not actually there in the sky. And this is the same with the Earth's magnetosphere. It is not made of individual lines, but is an encompassing torus field, with the hole in the middle of the donut shape field touching our atmosphere and forming auroral rings we see at both the North and South Poles. But in my reckoning, even this single torus around the whole planet is wrong, with it instead being a double torus, with one over each hemisphere. So each would have the donut rings being stretched from the poles, the aurora, around the Earth's outer atmosphere to the equator, with this double outflow from each torus being seen as the two different directional ocean currents flows at the equator. So with this model and enough to power input from the Sun, the aurora could stretch from the poles all the way to the equator, with us seeing some form of distinction between the two around the equator, and just like we see with the equatorial currents. I introduced this to Don. He loves this the Null School map, but we can clearly see that the currents are travelling in different directions, and this happens all the way round the Earth. If we put it out.
What are these currents of?
These are ocean currents,
Okay.
and these are the outputs.
Movement.
Yeah, and we'll even see that the Gulf Stream is exactly mirrored on the other side.
Is this measuring the velocity or the temperature?
This is it's just showing where they are. It does actually, yeah, it changes intensity. This is updated every 3 hours, I believe it is now.
The intensity is the colours a measure of the speed, is it?
You can look at both velocity and water temperature.
Oh, on this. Okay.
So what are we looking at here?
We are looking at the ocean currents. We are looking at the ocean and how the currents run. And we can see that the Gulf Stream is not actually a Gulf Stream, it's actually an equatorial stream.
Yeah.
And the same on the other side. It actually comes up and literally comes off over there, off of Japan. So, and at the South Pole we can actually see what drives the ocean currents. It is the return, these are the down currents, which we'll show in a minute. The rings at the pole are usually in discharge mode 1 or dark mode, and only become visible in wavelengths of the human eyesight when a polar storm hits and intensifies the discharge, and which then manifested in plasma discharge mode 2, glow mode. And these are the northern and southern lights, also known as the aurora borealis and the aurora australis. This electrical connection directed to the poles from a highly charged body like the Sun can also be created artificially in a lab here on Earth, with what is known as the planetavella, and which is an extended design from the original concept by Christian Birkeland. This, though, is an ideal scenario with the artificially created chamber, whereas in the solar system there's a lot more going on, but the principle is the same. A more highly charged anode object will discharge, or more completely or correctly have charge pulled from the cathode objects, which is holding less charge, and will glow at the polar regions when a planet has an internal magnetic field, and so produce a magnetosphere, or even two, one over each hemisphere, to funnel that charge to the pole, to the planets. And this double hemisphere, I think, is why the poles are actually going towards each other, because they're not actually, it's not one, it is two. And that is why I think we're getting double poles appearing as well around the sun. Let's have a little look at the old, if I can pronounce it, This is from Leicester University, my favourite university in the country, because they do stuff with space.
An experiment that's actually over 100 years old. The Planetarella was originally designed by a Norwegian space physicist called Christian Birkeland, who in 1899 led an expedition to the top of an Arctic mountain to study the Northern Lights, or the Aurora Borealis, as they're also known. Birkeland was actually the first man who really started to understand how the auroras were formed, and back in his laboratory in Oslo, he built this experiment to show his ideas to the world. This particular Planetarella was designed by CNRS in France by a French scientist called Jean Lilleston. And it's a vacuum experiment. So what we have here is a vacuum chamber and a vacuum pump, which is a bit like a Hoover home. And the vacuum pump sucks up most of the air out of the chamber. Not all of the air, but most of it. So it's recreating the conditions about 100 kilometers altitude where we see the aurora. Now inside this vacuum chamber you've got a big ball here that represents the sun, and a small ball over there represents the Earth. And within this small ball we have this really strong magnet recreating the Earth's magnetic field. The next thing we do is we put a voltage from the sun to the Earth, and so we're drawing electrons from the sun towards the Earth. Now this recreates the solar wind of charged particles that is always flowing away from our sun and into interplanet space. Now when these solar winds, or when these charged particles come towards the Earth, they get trapped onto the Earth's magnetic field lines and they get funneled into the northern and the southern polar regions. And when they get to the northern and southern polar regions, they collide with the gases that are there. And what they do, they excite these gases and they actually give energy to the electrons within them. When these electrons relax, they give out light at the characteristic frequencies, thus creating the aurora. That's basically how the aurora is created on Earth, and similar to how the aurora is created on all planets that have a magnetic field.
Wow.
The rings of the pole are usually in discharge mode 1 or dark mode, and only become visible wavelengths. I've read that bit. Change the page. That's what I'm going to do. With the Earth, and unlike a planetarium, still can't say that word, Planetarella, where the charge coming in and out of the planet has a nice smooth metal surface, and which was first demonstrated by Christian Birkeland back at the turn of the 19th century and into the 20th. The Earth is a mix of broken land masses, conductive ocean water and less conductive frozen ice. And so the circuit is a lot more dynamic as the Earth's circuit passes through our already charged and laden atmosphere, and which is brought about because of an existing energy input into the Earth. Also, the Planetarella, with its model sun and planet, is in a controlled gas environment where the circuit connecting the Earth to the atmosphere has to negotiate all the different gases in the atmosphere, as well as being laden with H2O. And it is this charged interaction of the currents going back and up and down through the atmosphere that gives us our changing weather patterns. Charge travels between bodies through open space via filaments called Birkeland currents, being named after Christian Birkeland, pioneer of space weather and who first identified the electrical connection between the Earth and the Sun. These currents work at the same across many magnitudes, orders of magnitude, and when plasma discharge free, arc mode can be seen as a static spark from a door handle or a massive lightning bolt shooting across the sky, and of course these are all Birkeland currents. The understanding of them being currents travelling through space was expanded later by our good friend Dr. Donald Scott, or Professor Donald Scott should I say, who mathematically described them and showed that they are actual circuits within themselves and not just a power dump in one direction. But as already stated, unless the charge density is high enough in the plasma discharge mode 2 or 3 arc mode, the Birkeland currents cannot be seen in wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum that are visible to humans. But they can be described in other wavelengths and seen in other wavelengths of the spectrum, such as X-rays, ultraviolet and magnetic fields, and which shows that some sort of electrical activity is going on. An interesting side note is that one of the indications that is said to show that there are black holes in the middle of a galaxy is that they can detect X-rays coming from that point. But when you go into a dentist to get your teeth imaged, is a dentist X-ray machine powered by a quantum singularity, a very small black hole, or is it plugged into the mains? And that's our centre of our galaxy in X-ray, I think that was taken, clearly showing filaments and a nice little plasmoid. So a plasma discharge has to increase its charge density in order for us to see it with our eyes. And it does this when hitting denser matter like an atmosphere, as the streams of electrons bunch together, get restricted to a higher density within that restricted flow channel and start to discharge in plasma mode 2. Oh, Met Office. Should we have a look? No, maybe not.
No, look.
No? Do you want to have a look for Pierce? No?
They might have got this. They do other stuff.
Yeah, I don't know.
For Her Majesty's government.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. As the Birkeland currents hit the atmosphere, they split into individual up and down currents, and so lose their twin current structure, as described by Duns Scott, and so can no longer be really called Birkeland currents, but rather atmospheric currents instead, and constitute what are called the air masses. These are the traditional referred to as the cyclones and anticyclones, or areas of low and high air pressure. These air masses are different to what forms along the lines of convergence between the different air masses, such as storm clouds, supercells and the like, and their mechanisms shouldn't be confused with the air masses as a whole. So what we have in my model is the Earth radiating due to being in the Sun's electrical domain, with it needing to balance by way of an input-output current into the poles. Any charge and positive or negative spins as it moves, due to the magnetic fields it produces. As such, the output radiation forms peaks, with these being described as the atmospheric highs. In the southern hemisphere, these bands of low and high pressure are more distinguishable as they come down straight from under the aurora and go straight through the sea and have no land masses to actually negate. Now here we see that there's a line of white, which is the peaks of the high. The overall radiation is the yellow. And these are, so we have lines, so this is a typical Birkeland current, which you can see a lot easier on the South Pole, where you've got the high area, you've got a band of low area, you've got a band of high area. So this, at the moment, we know that there's 3 bands hitting the Earth, as far as the Birkeland current goes. Top it's a lot less distinguishable, due, like I say, due to the land masses. But they are still there, as the circles actually can be seen, but they are a lot less distinguishable due to the land masses. All currents have a natural spin action as they move, whether slowly as with the radiation from the Earth, or as with the input currents, we produce a higher spin rate as they drill their way through the overall radiation to the ground.
That's clear.
In the northern hemisphere, and due to the broken land masses and no central land mass at the pole, the input currents are a lot more disrupted as they try to get to the region around the North Pole, and as a result the weather patterns are a lot more dynamic and changeable in the north. As far as the weather goes, in the lines of convergence that brings it, and are 2 air masses of different electrical potential rubbing up against each other, and resulting in a short circuit between the air masses, with the water vapour in the atmosphere changing its matter state as a result. So the lines of convergence are what between the high and the low, the different charges, and you get in a short circuit. With a convergence line encountering, and when a convergence line encounters enough water vapour in the atmosphere, in the atmospheric highs, the H2O will change its matter state, lose energy and go down half a level to form a cloud. If enough water vapour is present with enough charge differential between the air masses, then the cloud will act as a conduit for the H2O to fully form as liquid. So clouds don't actually hold tons of water. They act as conduits for more vapour to quickly change matter states. This process can be seen more easily when looked at the other way round. If we start with solid water ice and then add energy to it, it becomes a liquid, as the molecules have to move around faster due to the input of energy. If we then add even more energy to the liquid, it will become a gas, with the molecules moving around even faster. If we then even add more energy to the gas, the atoms will be moving to such a high frequency that some of the electrons will start to break through from the nucleus, with the gas then becoming a conductive plasma. So by reversing this process, the different matter states must lose energy in order to drop to a lower matter state. And it is this that produces localized ionic winds, as the water vapour becomes liquid, or even a solid, as in hail, with the double release of energy. And so it's a double release of wind. So rain is made by energy on the water molecule being lost, with that released energy then adding to the larger electrical energy and moving charge that makes up the weather system as a whole. Both the Earth and the cloud bases are negatively charged and so keep their distance from each other. But when there is enough charge differential between the negative ground and the negative cloud, the need to balance that negative charge then has to force its way through the atmosphere contact level layer with the Earth, which is keeping them apart. And because it is the same charge value, it has to do so as a circuit, and so once again a Birkeland current is formed, with this exchange being seen as lightning bolts, tornadoes and water spouts, and which are all mechanisms for the equalisation of negative charge. But that can also be the equalisation of positive charge or positive and negative. With all these being cloud to ground or ground to cloud, depending on what has the higher negative charge value. So a circuit is a mechanism that allows for the balancing of charges in a system and not the movement of charge from one point to another. This was the absolute genius shown by Nikola Tesla when he invented stuff using AC electricity, as a charge just moved backwards and forwards down our transmission lines without actually going anywhere. Unlike the DC current, which runs in a circuit and has this realisation that, and it was this realisation by him, that is the energy coming off the moving charge that we use and not the moving charge itself. And this is obviously what made our modern day possible. And this is why companies now no longer called electricity companies, they're called energy companies, because that's what they sell to you, energy, not electricity. So it isn't a negative or positive charge that moves from one point to another, it must be something else. And this is, in my opinion, the ether substrates, and which is made up from moving neutrinos with their interaction with normal matter, that is giving the impression that the electron is moving. Although a neutrino is said to have zero charge and so doesn't affect normal matter, I must then see that is a neutrino creating a static charge in normal matter, and so creating an electrodynamic response, with the electron then being an energy response from the power input into the nucleus by the static electrostatic reaction of the neutrino. So even though the neutrino doesn't have charge in itself, it will produce one when it interacts with normal matter electrostatically. So with this model, we have a universe made of only neutrons interacting with neutrinos, and then giving off the impression that protons are real, with that interaction giving out a radiation on what we call the electron. So atoms are not full of empty space unless you call electron shells, or indeed the Earth's atmosphere, also empty space. So how far can they bind it? So, as for how they bind into the elements after this point, I of course would refer you to Edu and his structured atom model. With hydrogen atom, the most abundant atom in a known universe, we have a single activated neutron with a single energy response, an electron. This atom is fundamental and the most powerful, as it is not only the basic building block to all the other elements that follow, but because its contact energy response double layer is exposed without another electron layer to protect it, as with helium, it makes it extremely volatile and high powered, as we saw with Sapphire's tungsten tip probe, or even a hydrogen bomb. So the atom's ionosphere is directly in contact with the nucleus, although separated due to it being a double layer. We can even look at the piezoelectricity to see how creating a separation of charge by distorting a crystal will give us a big response when a distortion, an induced double layer, is relaxed and a spark is produced. By collapsing the hydrogen single layer, the electron, all the power in its ionosphere discharges to the atom's surface and creates a short circuit of immense power. As already stated, when clouds form, they change from a gas state wolfrate into liquid, and so have to go down an energy level. And the two energy levels, if how falls, oh, hold on, have I repeated a paragraph? Okay. The loss of charge adds gusts to the overall weather system's moving charge, the wind. When massive changes in matter states happen quickly, from vapour to liquid as well as the solid, massive amounts of charge is released, with the straight line and vortex winds being created, as the released charge needs to also balance within its environment. I think we get the idea.
That's not an artist's impression or any crap. That's
No, these are rain bombs. This is what's happening in the atmosphere now. It's all getting accelerated. Obviously, Piers is absolutely perfect with his model, but charge is being accelerated due to metal particulates being pumped into the atmosphere, and like the tungsten tip of sapphire, it accelerates charge. And this is why the events are becoming so extreme, because we have accelerated charge going up and down through the atmosphere. From the research done by Professor Gerald Pollack, and it was shown that the structure of water has a full favour separating charge, where H2O becomes structured H3O2, and it forms a lattice. We see how important the water itself is to how the weather operates, and not something that responds to heat, air pressure, etc., as was the traditional ideas. And I believe this is what water tension is all about. Because the water is hitting the atmosphere, it is creating a double layer, and that's why we get water
Surface
tension.
tension, you have a higher electron count.
Yes,
Surface
that's it.
tension.
So basically, it's one medium hitting a medium, and it'll naturally form a double layer. Correct. Yeah. But when enough H2O is present, it allows large layers of separated charge to form within the atmosphere and forms an electrical pile of great strength, and which goes up through the atmospheric layering. These cloud structures, when fully charged, will then need to both balance different charged layers within themselves, but also a whole, but also itself as a whole within the gap between the positively charged ionosphere and the negatively charged ground. As the Earth is negatively charged electrically, as well as the clouds, one naturally repels the other. But because of the atmosphere is charged in double layers, with the contact layer being the strongest by a very, very long way, due to it touching the Earth's surface, and because of the way it separates in layers, the cloud is attracted to the bottom of the second layer as it forms. But because of the exclusion zone within the layer, it hits a wall and so has to flatten out, because we are hitting again its double layer, just like the water tension. If there is a massive imbalance, a positively loaded pole at the top of the storm cloud can even be seen discharging directly to the ground and outside of the cloud. Due to the charge needing to balance, and as a result, lightning can be seen as cloud to ground strikes as well as cloud to ground as well as ground to cloud, as the balancing of charge can go both ways. This balancing of charge between the Earth and the clouds makes up only 25% of the lightning strikes though, as most are cloud to cloud lightning, and so the different cloud masses balancing their own negative and positive charges. Storm clouds form along the lines of convergence, which are commonly called weather fronts, and this is where the different air masses are up against each other in short circuit, as previously stated, and so condense more water vapour into cloud, partial liquid state, and into liquid rain and solid hail, when the storm clouds are then becoming a conduit for the balancing of charge. When there is enough energy input into an object and it starts to get charged, it will then also have to discharge to some extent and so create a circuit within its electrical environment. But when an object has taken on as much charge as it can hold, the object charges from an anode, too much charge for its local environment, to a cathode, not enough charge in its local environment. And this is what we see when a comet suddenly lights up and discharges to its environment, and in space and forms around coma, around the comet's nucleus, and a long filament structure tail sweeping away from it. So it's not heat making the comet shine, it's a change in its electrical environment, with it entering a more highly charged environment, with that being just getting nearer to the sun, or the comet being hit by a CME or coronal mass, coronal hole stream. But what do we actually mean by saying being positively or negatively charged? When an atom has more electron shells than is in a balanced state, it is negatively charged. And when it doesn't have enough electron shells to be in a balanced state, it is said to be positively charged. So with this model, too much of a neutrino input means that the atom has to lose some electron shells to balance. And this is where I think we're getting into beta decay, but we can talk about that later. Whereas something that has positive charge means that an atom has less electron layers, and so it needs an input of neutrinos in order to reach a state of balance within itself, and so will look to either attract neutrinos from its environment or another body. Another thing I wondered as a child when travelling in a car, bus etc., was why on a hot sunny day and the car was moving, I could feel the heat of the sun through the glass after a while, but when I touched the window it was really quite cold. So how could heat make its way through a cold surface and still remain hot? This then made you start to think about the sun directly and why it was hotter, and by a very long way, at the edges of the sun's atmosphere compared to near the surface, its photosphere. But when taking the ether into account, and it was the moving electron layers as a response to an input, I come to realise that it is not the sun that is giving out the heat, but rather the ether being drawn out of or through a properly grounded object. So heat is stuff coming out of you, it's not radiation onto you, or rather neutrinos coming out of you. But when taking the ether, yeah, well that is about it, but I have got some additional thoughts. Are sonic booms and sonoluminescence piezoelectric in nature? Pressure on the water, creating a H3O2 lattice, and then like quartz, and so making it behave like quartz. And that is what's giving us the actual energy from piezoelectricity. Also, another thought, I was going to go on to gravity as well, but I haven't gone through that much. And I've obviously got to make it fit with wells.
Why don't you might add to the list the electrothermic effects of the current that you have.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, well, that's it. It is the moving charge it creates the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and through the different layers.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's like a
absolutely.
thermocouple.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Absolutely. Throwing away traditional quantum mechanics and making it E equals big M big C squared, as time doesn't exist in real physics. It means C isn't time, although it's all over described as speed of light. It's change. C is for change. If matter without charge, i.e. a neutron, is equal to 1, then by inputting energy into the matter, it will change and increase its mass by a squared factor. So mass is matter plus charge of a positive and negative, and which makes the mass move, or gives the mass energy, and with it lots of it, due to it having to form a circuit within its vibrant and so causing a separation of charge, the positive and the negative. So, yeah, I think that is about it. Any questions?
If I join the Facebook, can I access that?
Yes, this will be going out to anyone who wants it. I've got to alter a few bits. I've repeated.
You better say where you can find it then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The Facebook name you've got to.
Yeah, no, we're going to get back to that, which is simply it's Electric Cosmology Facebook group, and yeah, it's a closed group because I can't be bothered with trolls. And so, yeah, we've got over about 3,500 members, so it's, in a second, Eugene, I'll be with you. Yeah, it's funny enough, about 1,000 of those 3,000 people are from India and Pakistan, which is an interesting one. And actually a load more from Russia and China. So basically the West is really falling behind. They are taking on board what we're saying. You know, we're doing it here in the West, and it's going over there and they're using it. And we're being stopped here. It's outrageous.
I have the same experience on my website. I get a lot of readers from Pakistan,
Yeah,
South America. Yeah.
that's it. They're hungry for it. Eugene.
Yeah, one of the things you said was regarding the Birkeland current strength in different hemispheres. You said they're stronger in the south.
At the moment, yeah, because that's what it's showing us. I think because of the land mass, because it's got a central land. Show me what is globe. Yeah, we've got a central land mass of Antarctica, and the aurora goes round it, and so it's a straight input, and so it's really it wants to go there. Whereas the north, because it's disrupted, there's a certain amount of resistance. So more, I don't know why. The more I'm assuming is because of the land, the way the Earth is constructed. Is the fact, you know, you've got a nice big inflow into the south.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say that this is factually incorrect.
Well,
This is incorrect. Through observations, we actually know that Birkeland currents are first stronger in the north, as a general rule, and second, they're stronger during the summer. So now we have northern summer, they should be the strongest in the north, and pretty weak in the south, like 2 or 3 times weaker.
Purely from what we saw with the...
No, there have been a research in 2017 was published. They've analyzed the data from German CHAMP satellite, their magnetometer, and that's from 2000 to 2010. The measurements have been taken, and since 2010 they've been using swarm satellite data. It's by the ESA. So they've shown both hemispheric asymmetries and seasonal asymmetries. So again, in the summer the current is stronger, and in general in the north the current is stronger.
That's interesting. It would seem from the ocean patterns that there's a lot more going on in the south as a return current than there is in the north. So
these are surface currents in the sea of
no, these are
motion. What are these? What's this map of?
This is ocean currents, and this is which is sort of deep level, and this is what it's what drives the ocean currents.
Yeah, but this
That's
is
the
not-
main input. But that is a lot weaker now, yeah, because they're in the winter. But
But this isn't evidence of a Birkeland current. This is a sea current.
no, this is a sea current. No, but that's what I was talking about. It comes. But if we go back to the air, we can purely by the actual high and low. See, there's there's lows there, there's highs. There's actually 3 parts to that. Whereas in the north, there's also 3 parts. You've got white bits in there, and you've got white bit there, and the low bits there. But so it's a lot more interrupted. So I'm sure that's going to be.
We're talking about the clarity of the geometry that can be visible as a result of Earth conditions.
Yeah, I
rather
mean,
than-
there's still lots of it. There's still lots got to be looked into.
The sea and land issues, which will make a different setup.
That's how I understand
Big
it.
factor of differences.
So you might get a clearer pattern from a weaker current when the conditions are right to show the pattern.
Maybe.
Maybe.
What you need to take account caloric currents, their effectiveness.
Okay. And expand.
Account for what?
Speak up.
The telluric currents, the ground currents affect this patterns too, so that needs to be accounted for.
Well, I think that's what we see. Right. What we see coming off of. Well, these are all
Yes.
ocean currents. So
Yeah,
these are one could map televic currents over the top of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you map those, then you'll see
Unfortunately, it doesn't do both. So
right.
it doesn't do televic currents. It only does ocean currents. Piers?
What? You want me to go over to something?
Just wonder if you want to know any questions or observations or.
Well, I've got a sort of general comments and some kind of ideas about the problems that's facing us all in the future.
Well, do you want to?
Shall I do that?
Yeah,
Okay.
go.
Hope you don't mind, people. What's the time? Have we got time for this?
You got 5 minutes. We've got till 6 o'clock.
5 minutes, okay. Well, first of all, I'd say, look, standard meteorology is not all wrong. I mean, there are stuff that does go on, which is, gravity and whatever. So it might be some of what Philip does, like overstates or understates, natural circulation. So, I don't think we should neglect everything. There are highs and lows due to, normal atmospheric pressure understood by gravity and so forth. But the difficulties which we do have in meteorology, and meteorologists admit this, is things like formation of tornadoes, hurricanes, giant hailstorms, these intense things, all of which, when you look at them, involve electricity. So there is stuff going on which is basically not coped with by standard meteorology that tries to generate all the electricity by various friction processes, a lot of which don't work, and also the formation of water droplets under various processes which are often not really understood. Okay, so that's a background fact. So what are the difficulties facing us right now is, of course, we have stories of false narratives all over the place, right? The CO2 story is one. We've got problems of 5G being imposed upon us allegedly to help us communicate, but of course, they're involving massive control of people. You've got Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is making everybody live into smaller, more expensive places, more about control. And as I said in the previous thing, the issues now are accountability versus globalisation, and we have to support accountability because that's the only way we can get through against false narratives. And now, we haven't got time to discuss much here, but I think things like new peer-reviewed processes are going to be very important so that we can open out science. A question has often come up: well, how's it all going to end? Are we going to end up in prison, or are we going to actually, overcome increasing globalisation and false narratives being dictated upon us? Because that is what is happening. Now, I don't have an answer to that, but it means we do have to work together with a lot of other people. And I want to cast your minds to the end of the Soviet Union. Now, there may have been good and bad in the Soviet Union, we'll leave that aside. But the interesting thing about what happened was that the bureaucracy there, which I would call a suspended bureaucracy, it just depended on people accepting it and paying taxes to it, and then it telling them what to do. And once people started saying no, it actually collapsed instantly. Pretty well instantly. Whereas, you know, the capitalist mega corporations are not going to give up easily, right? But little story about the Berlin Wall. Do you remember that? Egon Krenz. He turned up somewhere. The East German government had said, yeah, okay, we're going to take down the Berlin Wall and let you people come and go, but we want to carry on as being in charge. And he went to a great big meeting and he said, Egon Krenz, he was just the Prime Minister for about, well, 5 minutes maybe, but, you know, a week or so. He turned up and he said, haven't I done enough? Because he'd done a tremendous amount. And everybody screamed, no! And he was gone. And then after that, the whole lot actually collapsed. So, you know, if we do it right, I just kind of think it could be simultaneous all over the world, people suddenly saying, yes, we've got to get rid of this, you know, false narrative. Okay, now having said that, what are the main obstacles? Well, I think, that, as I said earlier, but I want to repeat a few things in it, the biggest ideological weapon that the ruling circles have, the mega corporations have, is the man-made climate change story. Because it runs through everything. To brainwash children, to justify deindustrialisation here, 5G there, control of you here, taxes there, whatever, anything you want. Oh, and you can give a subsidy to somebody you like if he's going to save the planet, right? He may indeed be killing birds and bats, but it's saving the planet, you know? He may be giving better communication to smart meters, and he's going to chop down trees to do it. Oh, that's saving the planet. It's nonsense, but we do have to really fight it. So, you know, I would say, you know, the key things we've got to know is man-made climate change does not exist. Carbon dioxide is an effect, not levels, are an effect, not a cause. And climate change policies are not to control climate, they're to control you. And I just want to give you a little story about, because I didn't have time for this yesterday, just this very simple story, about just to show you where the mega corporations really are at. It was the Global Oil Summit of 2004. Now, I didn't mention this yesterday, did I? No, okay. I was invited to speak, a big meeting of, it was amazing people there. All the top executives of the oil companies were there. Andrei Ilyanov, Putin's chief scientific advisor, were there. The American military were there. I mean, just, you know, the people who are deciding the world, right? So, and I'll give this presentation, you know, show these graphs. Global, you know, warming comes along with increased solar activity, right? And I finished the presentation, and this guy walks up to me and he says, oh, Mr. Corbyn, I just want to show you that we're on to the case. I thought, well, that's nice, what do you mean? So he flicked through a bundle of graphs, you know, and some of them were similar to the graphs I'd done, you know. I mean, so obviously, they were on the case, absolutely. I said, well, that's great, so, but why you got me here then? And he said, oh, well, Mr. Corbyn, you're doing independent research elsewhere and you've had a lot of success, and so we wanted, you know, you to come along and talk to us to get corroboration, he said. I said, oh, that's nice. So I said, and who are you? He said, well, I'm retiring at this meeting, but I am the chief executive of Exxon Mobil. I'll repeat that. I am the chief executive of Exxon Mobil, and he just say we're already on the case. So, okay. 2 weeks later, friends of mine said, why don't we get some money off those bastards? I said, well, okay, I don't know. I don't want to, you know, be a tool of the oil companies. So he said, look, tell you what, we asked the United Nations for money, because we had this idea that the United Nations on one side and the oil companies on another. That's what our idea was. Okay. And we asked the oil companies for money so we could get equal funding and we could be independent. You know, it's a good idea. So, friends of mine went there, and they were insiders. The oil companies came back straight away and said, oh, we do like Mr. Corbyn's work, but we don't want to give him any money because we don't want to upset the Green lobby. Repeat, we do not want to upset the Green lobby. So they decided in 2004, 1, what's real, 2, how to make money. And they are different things. Anyone who's on Wall Street who's there to tell the truth is going to go, right? You're there to make money. That's what you're there for. And the oil companies then basically, what they did, they went along saying, yes, we support the CO2 story. And if you read their website, they're very explicit, BP website, it says, We support all action against man-made climate change so long as there is a uniform price for carbon across the board. Okay? Now that means when a farmer is paid extra money to burn food instead of selling it to people, because you know he's got to be paid extra to burn it as opposed to sell it to peasants who won't pay much, right? The price of energy goes up. So the World Energy Corporations, they're going to lose 2% of world energy production to alternatives, because that's all it is worldwide. Wind power and all those bird killing operations are just 2% of total energy production. The other 98% they're obviously still in control of, and basically they double profits on that. So it's a no-brainer. It's a complete no-brainer. Obviously they'll go along with the story all the way, which is why they are sitting on the committee which has set up Extinction Rebellion. So you understand what was portrayed as the enemy, is actually, well, the Greens' enemy, it's actually the Greens' friend. And of course the Greens are generally speaking fake Greens, and the Green Party supports 5G and chopping down trees to make way for 5G. So, well, enough said, but that might help you argue with people when they are dragged along by this false narrative. So I'll end there for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it, or do we have any questions for Piers?
I just want to say, man-made weather change in terms of aluminium and shit put up in the atmosphere is worth remembering.
Oh yeah,
that's what I said about accelerating
bad,
shaft.
evil stuff. It's been
I'd
done.
like to go more into that at some point than on there.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.